Yeah, not everybody has a field.
It's actually very small. And it looks like I would expect like 3 or 4 of these are local.
I think Chris is now in the UK.
Ah.
But he was once here on the coast and then
I think so.
Okay, so what do you want to
Like the first time, like, you know, the 10th time difference.
Go? Yes. Okay, thank you, Master. Yeah. All right. I was afraid to say it. I can shout down anybody. Okay. So how? So we'll do 2 steps in how. The first will be about systems and endogenous contrast. So this is the contrast which is native to the body, and how do you take advantage of that? And I'll show you a few examples of that. And then the second half, we'll talk about exogenous contrast, which is conventional in molecular imaging. We'll talk about some contrast agents and different kinds of contrast agents. So how do you do it? Well, the first is, as I said a couple times, is where Lihong really got into this, was this idea that because you are diffusion limited in traditional imaging and you're trying to take advantage now of that diffusion for doing photoacoustic imaging, the best thing you can possibly do is enclose your object in a sphere and deliver light from every direction such that the surface of that sphere, you're satisfying safety standards. Okay, which are, you have safety standards based on both the luminance and the radiance. Okay, so that's the peak energy per pulse per centimeter square and the average power per centimeter square. So if you hit the surface of the sphere with, or the surface of your object, we're physicists, right? So we got spherical source, we got spherical chicken inside, which are imaging. All right. So as long as you hit those safety limits at the surface of that, the best thing you can do is that. The volumetric imaging. And people have built, a number of groups around the world have built variations on that theme based on the specific limitations. Obviously, a mouse is not spherical, but you can do like it's cylindrical, right? So you have rings in one direction and extension in the other directions, but you can do that. And then, what can you do with the ultrasound? Well, exactly the same thing. The largest possible aperture that you can. So you have a spherical aperture around that. Right? So you have a lot of light sources, and you have a lot of ultrasound sources. And then it's really simple. So I'm not going to show any diagrams for this one, because it's pretty simple. It's you pulse on a big light that comes in from all the fibers all the way around. That's time t equals 0. You record your signals from all your ultrasound, and you beamform, which you learned how to do this morning. So you go to every point in that volume, you back project up to all the different transducers and say, how long did it take to propagate from that point back up to these transducers? I cohere all those together, and that's the reconstruction at that point. Okay? So it's just that simple. You then have to go and try to make a correction. If you say that's the absolute absorption, then you have to make some kind of estimation of what the luminance is. However, if you're in a diffusion limited situation, is that the luminance variations are not, the fluence, I keep saying luminance, sorry, the fluence variations are not that great. However, there's corrections that people go in for doing that. All right, so that's the next tier, and that's part of the image reconstruction world, is looking at that, this trade-off between trying to simultaneously estimate the fluence and the absorption coefficient. But that's it, and some of the images I'll show you come from systems which are like that, and that's a wonderful research tool, but you are not going to stick a human being inside a sphere of ultrasound transducers sampled at lambda over 2, fiber sources with sufficient energies to hit safety limits over the entire surface of the body and the like. So obviously there's lots of trade-offs when you move towards clinical, and that's what we'll get to, the interesting stuff. It's 2 extreme cases, and the 2 extreme cases I'll talk about at the bottom here. Okay? The laser sources typically are very high intensity, low repetition rate lasers. And the reason for that is you have these 2 safety standards. Okay, the 2 safety standards, one is on fluence, one is on radiance. All right, so millijoules per centimeter squared, so in one pulse, what you're able to get, and watts per centimeter squared, your average power. What you want to do, ideal case, is get up to that fluence, is you want that all in one pulse. You know, you hear afterwards about frequency domain stuff, which is trying to do a trade-off between these things. But theoretically, if you could do it, the best thing you could do is have a short, compact, nanosecond scale pulse, which is at your fluence limit. It's everywhere around the body. When you do that, to satisfy radiance limitations, you can't go at high rep rates. You have to go at lower rep rates. So, for example, if you're 1064 nanometers, it's 100 millijoules per centimeter squared is your fluence limited to surface of the body. It's 1 watt per centimeter squared, which means you can go at 10 hertz. Okay? So that's a basic trade-off that you have with high intensity, with those. Like I said, it's efficient. So again, these are all trade-offs that you're going to go through. Because 10 hertz, nobody makes a real-time image at 10 hertz. Yeah.
So I mean, it's just a curious question. So we were talking about phototoxicity, but how about ultrasonic toxicity? Because we have ultrasonic gators in the lab, and we're advised to wear headphones, I mean a certain type of headphones to protect your hearing. And there's a baby in the womb. And
that's acoustic. I mean, that's not ultrasound. That's sound.
Ultrasonic gators.
Yeah, the ultrasonic is what you're actually hearing is not the ultrasound.
No, you don't hear it. Okay, yeah, you hear a kind of high pitch.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah, no, but there are. So there's safety limits which have to do with acoustics to the ear, which because of the very low sound velocities that you have and densities, so acoustic impedance in air is nothing. And so the pressure, even relatively small pressures, can have very high intensities. So that's why you have to be careful in the air. Water, we don't have that. So because the impedances are so much higher relative to air, at the pressures where the acoustic intensities are really very small. Okay, so, no, but when we do traditional ultrasound, we have to worry about that, and it's primarily 2 mechanisms, thermal and mechanical cavitation types of things. Okay, now I actually talk a little bit about that. We get the contrast in because we actually exploit some of those effects for contrast, in a controlled way for contrast agents. That's good. No, but it's very different. It's very interesting. Phenomena is, the reason why I think it's interesting is because I'm working with some groups now trying to do very high frequency ultrasound in air. And we're trying to figure out safety issues. Because you can't hear what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, mouse can hear to 100 kilohertz in air. Which is amazing to me, but they can hear to about 100 kilohertz in air. Bats, yeah, and bats too, right? Bats go up there to that range. So we don't know. Okay, anyway. So that's typical, but again, why we're going to do trade-offs, because 10 hertz, you're not going to make real-time images at 10 hertz. Okay? Multi-wavelength imaging, beautiful stuff, and we'll get into that. I'll show you some examples. Multi-wavelength is how you can extract endogenous contrast, taking into account optical spectra, so exploiting optical spectra to look at specific things, and it follows on great to what David was talking about last night. You'll see how we can do oxygenation state measurements non-invasively in an imaging way. And this is really most appropriate for small animals. where your total propagation paths are not too bad. When you get into much larger propagation paths, you have to worry about calibrations. Because once you start doing remember, your signal, your photoacoustic signal is the product of the fluence and the absorption coefficient. Once you start getting fluctuations in the fluence, especially you'll see wavelength dependent changes. And we have, to do these tricks of multi-wavelength, your wavelengths are way different from each other. And so you can have quite different variations in fluence with wavelength as you go very deep. But for doing small animals, it's perfectly fine, and it works very, very well. And I'll show you some pictures of that, which I think are kind of spectacular from a few groups. So not us. We don't do that. Because we want to go to the clinic. So I will spend time talking about looking at the trade-offs you need to go in and try to do something in the clinic. And I also want to present, though, the other direction, which I think is exciting from a basic science direction. I don't think it's going to have much influence clinically. But from basic science direction, I think it's very, very interesting because it's trying to bring in sort of another contrast mechanism into the optical microscopy world. But why it can be exciting is this multi-wavelength stuff, is that it can give you some molecular sensitivity without labels. So label-free. So where it could come into play clinically or biomedically is maybe things like flow cytometry or other things. It may come in. So I will talk about that a little bit at the end of this session. Okay, so just reminding you, right, this guy goes in, you make heat, out it comes, there's the wave equation, you record it with a transducer, and now you want to make a picture. So this is one early type system of one trying to move towards clinical. Okay, so this is not this big volumetric thing. This is one of the early systems from, I don't know, almost 15 years ago of trying to just get to something that looks clinical. And this up here is actually a photo of the thing, so it's Rube Goldberg type of thing. That's a traditional ultrasound array transducer of the last generation, and you just bring in a bunch of fibers. Those fibers are all in parallel, so they will be fired. You have a low repetition rate. High intensity, where's the laser? Yeah, that's it. Okay, so a low repetition rate, high intensity laser, which drives all these guys in parallel. You illuminate, and you try to make a cross-sectional image, so you try to optimize the light delivery to a region. So again, you're not doing volumetric imaging. The light is diffusing, so you're losing efficiency with depth. But this was the first level of trying to do a trade-off of these studies. And these were the type of systems of about 10 to 15 years ago doing that. Where that's morphed is two groups. One, Stas Melyanov, who taught at this thing, right?
He did.
Okay. Who's no longer at UT Austin. He's at Georgia Tech in the United States. Just moved there. But he and a group from Erasmus University in Rotterdam, Toon van de Steen, the two groups have moved of looking, of integrating, using this kind of approach, intravascular photoacoustics. So this is intravascular imaging, so it's just like I talked about earlier, where you bring an ultrasound transducer in, so you're from the inside imaging out, right? And this is a very active clinical area in interventional cardiology. About 1 million of these procedures per year, so it's fairly routine stuff. And what they were doing is integrating in a system of that type. So some fibers, suboptimal light delivery, but get something in there, low repetition rates, but just trying to get some photoacoustic information from within the vessel, and then making an integrated image. They should have called it PAUSE, but they didn't. That's all right. So they have IVPA/IVUS, but it's in there. And what they're really looking at, what they did take advantage of, both of these groups, is this. And that is they took advantage of the endogenous photoacoustic contrast that you have because of the richness in the optical absorption spectra that you have. So the ones I'll show you, which have to do with blood oxygenation and the like, are obviously exploiting the changes of oxy and deoxyhemoglobin that you have in the absorption spectrum. But the ones for the intravascular photoacoustics are primarily looking at the fat. Okay, so they're trying to look at large lipid pools, because ultrasound can do that, but does not do it well. Photoacoustics can do this very well, and obviously that's critically important in trying to judge what you're going to do in interventional procedures, whether it's a stable plaque or non-stable plaque, or just characterizing lesions along while you're doing intravascular pictures. So the intravascular folks have really looked at it, using these spectral characteristics to identify fat, and the blood folks have used the spectral characteristics of oxy and deoxy to look at oxygenation. All the things that David talked about yesterday. Oxygenation state, hematocrit, all these kinds of physiologic indices, but in image format. Okay, so how do you do it? So the way you do it is you make photographs. Now these are relatively slow, so each one of these images was probably like a hertz or 2 hertz kind of rep rate. So it's not going to plug and play in the clinic right away, but it's just proving principle that when you swept wavelength, there would be subtle differences, and you say, well, where are the subtle differences? They look all kind of the same to me. When you're in low wavelengths, you're seeing nothing over in this region. You've got longer wavelengths, you start seeing here. When you get to up to the 1300, you start to really highlight the fat regions. And so you can do some molecule or species constituent characterization. So principal component now, so if you're talking about in the first days exactly how they do these things, is going in and trying to identify different constituents using the optical absorption spectrum. Okay, I got them out of order. Yeah, okay. So anyway, these are the more recent pictures where they're going to these longer wavelengths, 1200, 1700 for fat identification. And so here it's a little clearer, and these pictures are made at probably about 5 to 10 hertz. Frame rates are getting closer to real clinical applications, but this right here is a large lipid pool. You can see that difference that you have in the photoacoustic image of those wavelengths, and so that can be easily identified as a large lipid pool. So,
are they time gated?
No.
They're not talking about the heart rate or...
No. Not now. They could, but they're not now. Yeah, because the real, so the intravascular ultrasound now, there's the way it's done, you can do it every way you want, but the basic frame rate is about 100 kilohertz. 100 kiloframes a second in the basic ultrasound. Now they don't, they signal average and do other things, so they don't need it. So the beam forming in electronics can go as fast as you want, so it's really the laser here. So, got that a little out of order, sorry. So now, the other one is blood, okay? And these are 3 groups who have just done wonderful jobs in this area. Lehan, who is moving from Washington University, St. Louis to Caltech. He's been moving forever. Like 2 years to, I say you get a van, you stick your stuff in it, you drive to California. But it's taken about 2 years to do this. But anyway, this was, the cover of Nature, and it was one of the things that was sort of like, okay, photoacoustics is on the map, which was doing FPA. Right? We had fMRI and FNIRS, and this was FPA. So it was instead of a finger tap, it's done in a rack, and it's right paw and left paw stimulation, and looking at doing both, functional. So looking at the change in oxygenation state associated with FPAWS. FPAWS. No, it's not. Well, there's no ultrasound. This is when they started used to yell at there's no ultrasound in there.
What's the gray image?
No, that's background standard photoacoustics at 1 wavelength.
All right.
Okay. So anyway, there was this, and that's integrated over time too. So that's not real time. That's integrated over multiple cycles. That is gated. That was to do that, but it's a beautiful picture. It was great. Really did that. The group in Munich, Vasilis and Daniel, I know Daniel well, Brzezinski. We have at least one from the group here, I know. Is there anybody else from that group here? You the only one? Okay. But then a beautiful job with this in the iThera system, which you can buy commercially, was derived from the lab. Wonderful small animal system. Only photoacoustics again, though, which I still think is a problem. But the photoacoustic part is well done, and they're looking at oxygenation state here, looking, I think it's a tumor development and change in the oxygenation state. And then Paul Beard, who's at University College London, has developed a number of systems and really doing sort of microvessel imaging exploiting these multi-wavelength sequences as well. So really very, very, very nice stuff these guys have done. But again, all preclinical, basic science kinds of studies done. These are done with these low repetition rate, high intensity lasers.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
You keep distinguishing between only photoacoustics and photoacoustics plus ultrasound.
Yes.
In both cases, you use the same type of transducer for
Right.
monitoring, right, or for receiving.
Right.
It's only a question of whether you also use it to transmit.
Right. Right. And also, too, there are, and it's sort of like technical details, but there's trade-offs. If you only want to do photoacoustic imaging, it relaxes some of the technical constraints on the transducers. Whereas when you want to do full pulse echo imaging, it's tougher technically. So for example, on transducers, if you just receive, you don't have to worry about managing high voltage pulses. And so you can get higher densities. I mean, there's lots of those kinds of trade-offs that are in there. I will be honest, those three groups, who are all friends and have known for a long time now, I yelled at a lot about 15 years ago saying, where's the ultrasound? Where is it? You know? You got the transducers, okay, so they're not going to be perfect, you know, because you have these limitations, but make it, right? Make those pictures that are there. And I think it has to do with the world that they were in. If you're in real-time clinical ultrasound, or real-time clinical imaging, you'd be making ultrasound pictures. If nothing else, just to guide you anatomically to where you want to look. Okay, this last one, this is just a precursor. This is not done with the kind of photoacoustic microscope we're going to talk about at the end. But it's just leading towards that. This is Michael Coleus, who's at Ryerson, and he was just showing that he could do a little single cell identification, again, multi-wavelength sorting. But here, his spatial resolution was determined by the ultrasound, so he's actually working close to a gigahertz ultrasound frequency in this case. Okay. So, give that as a background. Wonderful stuff is going, but those steps have not really brought us closer to true clinical applications of photoacoustic and ultra. It's simultaneous. So many applications will require these real-time frame rates. And this is something which, again, one of these things I've preached for a long time. The ultrasound industry is moving towards those little handheld things, right? If you have a laser that takes up 3/4 of a room, nobody's going to integrate that into a low-cost portable system. So even that little system I showed in the beginning, which just had the fibers and all that in there and had a little box with the laser was half of an optics bench on there because of these very high-power, low-rep rate systems. And the optical delivery system, you're not going to have the unit sphere, one human unit sphere, is somehow you have to seamlessly bring in the optics because, again, if you go into the clinic, is that if you have a big bulky probe when they're doing things, they're just not going to use it. They're not going to use it because let's go back to ultrasound that's in there. So all of these three pieces need to be taken into account. So this is an area which we have worked on for a while now, and as I said, this broad laser illumination which is used now and a transducer, this is great when you're doing this 360, but now you're going to be restricted for real clinical applications to these linear, it can be two-dimensional, but they're physically limited apertures which you're going to be acquiring the data. The broad, high-pulsed illumination is optimum, always will be optimum, but it forces these very low rep rates. And you're not going to be able to take avail of all the spatial frequencies because of these limited arrays. But, so anyway, the first systems were done this way. Just take a linear array, take a big pulse laser, and see what you can do. Sound tastes texture, right, so I said that stuff. But the problems are you have this low repetition rates and the bulky and expensive. So I've shown this picture for a while, for about the last 3 years, because this is one of these ultra. By the way, anybody know who that guy is? anybody know who that guy is? Yeah, I love it. Okay, this guy has been the CEO of like the 5th largest company in the world for 20 years, and nobody knows who he is. Okay, his name's Jeff Immelt. Now his predecessor, these guys will know, but you won't know, but Jack Welch, right? So he is Jack Welch's successor for about 20 years now. But anyway, so finally, some famous dude. You know, that's where it's going, right? That's where these scanners are going. And then it's like the Wizard of Oz. You've all seen the Wizard of Oz, the movie. In the last scene, where they come in, don't look behind the curtain. Right? Don't look behind the curtain. Because that's the laser that's associated with it because of these high peak powers, which is optimal, is you need these large lasers. Oh, whoops. Sorry. These large laser systems. And so put in 1 unit pen, right? So there's the pen, that's about that size there. This is, so the laser, remember, is this whole thing plus this whole thing plus the little stuff control system under the table. Okay. So even though this is the optimal solution from the sort of signal to noise ratio point of view and imaging point of view, it's not going to be what's going into the clinic. So an approach we just demonstrated with a simple setup system, and we're now building, is to take high repetition rate but lower energy lasers, to scan them quickly and scan them only in the region in which you are going to image with that array, because those are the only spatial frequencies that are available, and try to manage then, in terms of the optics design, try to manage the best trade-off, because you're going to have this diffusion of the light as it goes in. You know you're going to diffuse the light. So try to manage in terms of the number of fibers, the repetition rate, all those things is an optimization or trade-off problem to do that. Okay, so sometimes that advantage is you can trade off some. Again, you're not optimal. We don't have the same penetration as the big guys, but we can work at very, very high repetition rates. Why is that good? Real time. Okay, so we can work at high repetition rates, and we can make them very, very compact and very inexpensive. So what I will show you, the images I'll show you were made with this laser. It comes from Laser Export, which is a Russian company. We bought it for about $22,000, $23,000. You can now buy it for $15,000 bucks. It's 1053, so it's diode pump neodymium. I think it's not YAG. So what's it? YLF? What's the other garnet? Excuse me? Yeah. Right. It's at 1053. This one gives us about 2 millijoules per pulse. We can go up to 100 kilohertz rep rates, but we start to saturate. We can maintain that, so it's 2 watts, so 2 kilohertz. We can go up, no, 1 kilohertz for this one we can go up to and still maintain the 2 millijoule pulse intensity. This fall, the same company is going to put out a 6 millijoule version that goes up, I think, to 10 watts. And so it's very interesting tech, and from these guys, these are friends of Anya. You know Anya?
Yes.
Yes. These are friends of Anya, and they see no limit. So they just see they're going to keep going up this curve. There's the unit pen. That's the size. The power supply is about the same size of that, and the cost. Okay. Now, why I like this, and I'll just show you how we put it together, and then some images. Why I like this is my philosophy for clinical translation in ultrasound. Ultrasound, I'm not going to say the highest end scanner, but a typical scanner you would find in the hospital costs about $100,000. Okay, purchase it for about $100,000, and then in addition to that, you buy additional things. Okay, and what are the additional things? So usually they're probes. Remember I told you optimize the probe for your application? So you'll get an echocardiography probe, or a small parts probe, or a pediatric probe, or something like that. So you optimize the probes. And additional applications that you can have, which is usually mostly software or some changes in the hardware which will upgrade speed to get a higher frame rate or something like that. Those are typically on about $20,000. Those options, the solenoids. You buy a machine at 100, next year you buy a new probe and then upgrade something about $20,000. So my goal is keep it around $20,000. Because if you can sell photoacoustics as an option That's $20,000 and it seamlessly integrates into the system. People will at least start to look at it for some applications. And I think I'll show you one application at the end where people will go immediately with it if they had it. Okay, so that's the philosophy. So how well can you do with this? Okay, so again now what we have is it will look like that old system, but now we're integrating the fibers directly into the ultrasound transducer itself, so you won't see any fibers outside. And it will take the width of the transducer and increase it by about half millimeter. Okay? Field is saying all that, about a half millimeter wider. We then have a lot, and it will be integrated into the cabling system that comes back, and then there's a split out in the little scanner itself, and then you have a laser optical switching system which can switch between these at rates anywhere from hertz up to tens of kilohertz. We can switch. So we can match to the laser rep our switching speeds going through these fibers. Okay, here's just a little test case. I'll show you some images that we made. So we're just doing an example where we have 20 fibers. Again, you always have to be designing to this. This is the safety limits. You know, and this is for 1053, so 100 millijoules per centimeter squared is our fluence limitations, and 1 watt per centimeter squared is our radiant. And so you always designing to that with that constraint. We then do it Monte Carlo. So we just, the ones you heard about last night, we just took a standard one from Steve Jett, who's in Oregon, worked with Lehan, that code, and we use it to try to optimize the timing, the delivery, the overlap, to optimize for specific applications. You don't need that stuff. Okay. Then, this is what's different about one of these types of systems we're moving towards the clinic. So another thing I used to yell at Lehan and all the other guys was, when you're doing these big high-power lasers at the low rep rates, let's say you're working at 10 hertz rep rate, you fire 10 hertz, the pulse is on for maybe 10 nanoseconds. You then acquire ultrasound data for 50, 60 microseconds. Then you wait for 100 milliseconds before I can do it again. All right? What do you do in that time? Nothing, right? No. Ultrasound philosophy, real-time imaging philosophy is every microsecond must be used productively. So what we've done is we've designed a scan sequence for this, that is the laser firings or scanning, we're interleaving ultrasound firing, so this is just a blow-up. But as we're moving the laser along, we're also moving ultrasound beams along. So we're integrating and interleaving the photoacoustic data acquisition and reconstruction with the ultrasound data acquisition and reconstruction. And by the way, if you go into the MRI business or the ultrasound business, you sit in front of a computer screen probably 50% of your time designing these things. You either love them, because you do all kinds of, because there's all kinds of little secondary artifacts you have to get rid of in designing these sequences, or you hate them because you're just looking at a computer screen all the time. Okay, that's some details, you don't need to know that. Okay, so here's what one of these things looks like. So what is this? So on the left is just showing if I made only a photoacoustic image, and I reconstruct for each single shot of the laser, that's why this guy is spinning so fast, I make sort of a micro image of a little area, right? If I interleave and put these all together with the photoacoustic and ultrasound, I have the ultrasound picture behind, so now the background is the ultrasound picture. For the color encoded is the photoacoustic picture, and what I have in there, here in this case, is just showing a needle, so 22 gauge needle, which is used a lot of times for drug delivery, and just in ex vivo. Okay, let me tantalize you with this because I'm going to come back to this. Okay? So, imagine this is a procedure in which you are delivering labeled stem cells to a particular area. Okay? And inside those stem cells you had an agent, which we'll learn how to design in the next module. An agent which is monitoring some process in the stem cells and will allow you with a wavelength to be able, particular wavelength, to be able to sense that photoacoustically. All right? So you now deliver it in there. You now deliver to cells. So let go. Inject. You're seeing the cells. Right? You pull the needle out. Come on, pull it out. Out it goes. And what are you imaging? The cells. I can come back tomorrow. I can come back in 2 days. I can look to see where the cells are, see if the cells are viable. Okay? So the first application we're actually looking at is for peripheral nerve, drug delivery to peripheral nerves, just to see where the drug diffuses over the periods of a few hours. But pretty much this is just a tool then that you can add as long as you design the contrast agents for that application. Everybody get that concept, just how that's going along and how you can do that imaging. And I will come back to that. Okay, so that's the how. So we've done 2 of the 3 major pieces the way the world has worked. First is these low rep rate, high intensity lasers, imaging over large volumes, and that's done basically, and has really been optimized for small animal imaging. And there's commercial systems out there like iThera, Visualsonics, others which are sort of optimized for small animal imaging. I'll show you where the world is trying to move towards clinical imaging. I think there's 2 areas of emphasis. One is in intravascular, and the other one is going to be for application, real-time applications for guidance types of things and monitoring things, where you're talking about penetrations 2 to 3 centimeters. Okay? So not whole body, but penetration to the. So there's lots of applications for that. Breast, peripheral nerves, endoscopic things can go there. Okay, the third one is microscopy. And I originally was not a big fan of this because of the regime that it started with, which is called acoustic resolution photoacoustic microscopy. And the idea there was that you would bring light in with the optical condenser. So you bring light in, and you'd be working in a range where you're not fully diffused. You're not truly ballistic, but you're not fully diffused. And you're working at fairly high ultrasound frequencies, typically 50 to 100 megahertz. And this allows you to look at depths up to a few millimeters with resolutions of about 25 micron or so. All right? And really, this is just kind of moving the frequencies up in a traditional photoacoustic approach. And so it's fine, as I said. This one, though, is the more modern, the optical resolution photoacoustic microscopy, which just goes to the other extreme. It says we got into photoacoustics to get around the diffusion limit, but can we use it when we're not in the diffusion limit, when we're in the ballistic level? So now, this optical resolution says, make the finest kind of optical delivery system you can, similar to what you'd have with the confocal system, to get the thing, although it's not confocal, but to get the thing with a diffraction-limited optical spot, so in the order of micron or even submicron resolution, okay? But then, pulse modulate the light source at the scale of nanoseconds to get an acoustic wave, and then just detect with an ultrasound transducer, which can be really much not any frequency. I mean, it could be on the order of 50 to 100 megahertz. It doesn't have to be gigahertz, because you'll just get your depth resolution from the acoustics, but you get your lateral resolution from the optics. And so this gets you down into the single micron range. So true microscopy, but with photoacoustic contrast. And this now is just proliferated with a whole bunch of papers, people being able to do things. People looking at individual red blood cells, looking at different kinds of tumor models, and making some very, very, very pretty images associated with this. Here is some vascular stuff that is done at this scale. 50 microns. These are... No, sorry. Okay, so I don't have the latest stuff in there, which is even, this is more sort of tens of micron scale, down to single-digit micron scale. But what they bring in, why this has gotten some excitement, what they bring in is you can do this wavelength selectivity check, as to move the wavelengths around to remove labels, so not to have to use labels for trying to identify biomolecules. That's number one. Number two is, this guy's simple, because you don't need these huge powers, so you only penetrate in millimeter. So the actual energies you need, and you focusing with optics, so the actual energies you need are relatively modest. And so you can use very high rep rate, low power lasers to be able to do this. So this is a realm, and I would say from the pure research side of photoacoustics, this is where the direction where people are going, is looking at how far you can take this. So there's basic studies where clinically it could come in, like I said, there's areas like flow cytometry, where you're trying to do cell identification, cell sorting, based on some signatures and using photoacoustic signatures instead of optical signatures, especially if you can do it label-free. Okay. So, what do you need to know from this stuff? Multi-wavelength photoacoustic imaging is very powerful. Allows you to take advantage of the richness of the optical spectra that you have for biomolecules, but in a way in which you can do at depth. Broad illumination with high intensity pulse is ideal, but the low rep rate and the large footprint limits this mainly for research applications, not for clinical applications. These real-time interleave sequences, pause sequences we like to call them, with high rep rate and low power lasers is probably the path that's going to get us into particular clinical applications first. And I alluded to one before, and I'll show you some examples, I think, in the next section. And the last piece is the photoacoustic microscopy is a very interesting area, still not clear where it's going to come into play, but its complement can be added. The way I like to think of it, you can add to the toolkit that you have conventional optical microscopies, being able to do things that is wavelength sensitively, and do some label do molecular identification without labels. Okay, so here I am at this state again. That's the end of this presentation.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So, do we have any questions about this? So we're really starting to use acoustics, and Matt's brought it right around so that we have also incorporating the light. And the point about this is that this is how we get to use the diffuse light. We saw from David Rose that you could use diffuse light directly, but then you get resolutions, as Matt was saying, in a whole burst of the order of 1 centimeter. Here with the photoacoustic, I'm not sure if I dare say tomography.
You can say whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
But 3D photoacoustics, then we're getting resolutions that are much better than that. And if you don't want to go too deep, you can get quite high resolution.
Right. Very high.
And if you want to go very shallow, you can actually use have a confocal optical and acoustic system and get this photoacoustic microscopy. But I regard that as really a different technique.
Yes, no, it is. To me, that's an optics. So this will come out when we do contrast agents. Is again, my acoustics point of view is photoacoustics is an add-on to an ultrasound system that allows you to do some molecular stuff in vivo. Okay. I think photoacoustic microscopy is, I have an optical microscopy system that I'm adding a dimension to, which allows me to not use label. Okay. Potentially not use label. And it's so how many applications.
How does the sound allow you not to use a label?
Oh, because you can exploit the optical absorption spectrum. Because you have huge signal-to-noise ratio.
The optical part is doing it.
Yeah, the optical. So you rapidly. So these lasers they're using are very low power now because of the focusing from light. So you can have, and the propagation distances are so fast, you can do hundreds of kilohertz of repetition rates.
But it's the optical part that's allowing you not to have a label.
Yeah, because you can
adding the acoustics.
No, because it's absorption. because it's absorption. So you're using for your contrast or identification optical absorption. But how do you read out the optical absorption? You read it out acoustically.
Yeah.
So I see it as an optical microscopy technique which uses acoustics as a readout mechanism.
In order to avoid the scattering or to...
Avoid scattering and also avoid label
Use
potential.
dynamic range.
Yeah.
Nanoparticles as well, in order to increase the absorption.
Yeah.
In the microscopy, you need flow force to see, to get a signal of, yeah. So if you need
Right.
a label.
Yeah, and so this, you don't, but there's stuff you're not gonna be able, because they're gonna be not unique optical signatures, absorption spectrum may not be unique enough, but there's gonna be stuff you'll be able to see, that you're gonna be able to pull out with that label.
Right, and that's because you can ignore the scattering on the way
Yes.
in. And the diffusion of the light into the tissue is an advantage because that gets the light everywhere, including under vessels and other places that you wouldn't normally have light without the scattering. Even if it's not in the vessel or absorbed in the vessel, you can still have light underneath because it goes around.
Well, that's this in-between region, moving towards the other, but the pure optical domain ones is you're relying on ballistic photons, ballistic photons.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're just using acoustics. So it's very similar to actually the traditional sort of photoacoustics measurements. It's really an optical,
Well, it's
it's optics measurement, but it's just acoustics as a readout.
It's subject to scattering coefficients as much as they control the absorption profiles
Right.
of the sample.
Right.
But that's what you get.
Right.
Okay.
Other question from Sergey here.
Yeah.
About multispectral photoacoustics. For this, the short pulses used, and then this pulse we have extended spectral range, spectral bandits for each wavelength. So what about spectral resolution and sensitivity?
I don't think it's dramatically different. So you're saying is if I go at 500 nanometers versus 1,000 nanometers and it's the same length pulse, is you have different optical, different optical number of cycles in there is effectively it. I don't think that's going to matter.
But the absorption depth is going to change if the absorption profile changes, so that is going to change.
Oh, yeah,
the spectrum of your signal.
Yeah, but because we're with these short pulses, we're working in this thermal confinement regime. It's more just a typical absorption and shadowing and those types of things. I don't think there's going to be effects related dramatically to the pulse length relative to wavelength. Not seen that anyway. Okay, last piece before we go eat. Which is, okay, I kept on do some molecular imaging with agents. What can you do? All right, so again, molecular imaging in this rubric for endogenous contrast is you have these molecular contrast agents that are targeted to a specific biomarker of interest that you're looking at, and then you try to image those at depth in the subject, in the patient, ultimately, clinically, to identify those molecular processes and monitor them. Okay? Ultrasound doesn't work. You got these big bubbles. Can you do it with integrated ultrasound and photoacoustics or pause? The answer is yes, we can go to these optical contrast agents to do that, which can do all the things that you've seen in traditional optical imaging. Okay, so let me just use this point as a starting point into talking about some general features of molecular contrast agents, and then specifically the photoacoustic contrast agents we've developed. Okay, so there's been a ton of development of photoacoustic contrast agents, and I just have 3 or 4 groups around the world, one of which is us, but in general, they're all have the same philosophy for a long time, for probably 10 years now. And these are the latest things, like 2015, 2014 results. And that is, a small object, typically 50 to 100 nanometers, that maximally absorbs light, and link it to a biological targeting agent for specific disease states. And these are examples that are done. Like I said, I showed that picture before. That's for gastrointestinal stuff. The ones down in the lower right from our lab is for a tumor model. And then there's another tumor model down in the lower left. And so they're all about the same philosophy. Okay, make something that's on the order of 50 to 100 nanometers, so it extravagances from vessels. that will produce a large, relatively large signal because it has very high absorption coefficients at this dimension and with the structure that's used, and that you can target easily to a lot of different types of biomarkers. Okay, so that's the idea. Well, what do you really need, though, right? You really should start from your motivation. But I just showed you where we were because I'm going to lead you in a different path. So this is the place to start with the motivation. Well, first of all, you need molecular sensitivity. What you would really like to do, and again, this is to me the ideal way to view a molecular image and as a goal for a molecular image. Consider the molecular image is as if I went 3 centimeters into the body. I was able to take a microbiopsy of 1 nanoliter of tissue. I could bring it out. I can then put it in an assay, okay, with targeting agents and measure however I do that. And I can do single molecule counting of the biomarkers within that 1 nanoliter of tissue. Okay? So if you could do that non-invasively, that's sort of like the ultimate goal of molecular imaging. Well, first of all, you have the sensitivity, right? Can you count individual molecules when you are down well into the body? Okay? And then the second one is molecular specificity. And I use these words particularly to just make analogy. They're not equal to, but the analogy to we have with any kind of diagnostic test in terms of this, or statistical test in terms of sensitivity and specificity, right? How likely am I to see it? How likely am I to make a mistake? And the molecular specificity in this case is talking about is when I see a signal in an image, and I'm doing molecular imaging, I'm going to try to associate it with the contrast agent. What if it doesn't come from the contrast agent? What do you do? So in traditional optical imaging, there's autofluorescence, right? So if you put it in a molecular probe, is your sensitivity is trying to say how, what's the small concentration of this probe I can have to get an effective fluorescent signal out, and then what's my background? So what's the autofluorescence and how, and can I separate this based on whatever signature, however you're going to process the data, that is, you can have a one-to-one correspondence between the brightness you have in the picture and the concentration of that agent. And so this is the way I like to think about it, is that an ideal molecular imaging system, in this case for photoacoustics, but for any imaging system, is that what you really want is you want something that will start at 0. If I have 0 biomarkers in the in my little nanoliter of tissue, which I'm trying to analyze, if I have 0 there, then I get 0 signal out. But as soon as I can get small numbers of particles of markers labeled, I will have a recorded photoacoustic signal or molecular signal in general. However, no system can go all the way to 0 because it has some noise in there. So it has some set limitations. And that's a fundamental detection limit. And that will limit the sensitivity. So you start with whatever your fundamental detection limit is, and then you go through the way in which you design agents in your imaging system. You look back and say, I can detect a minimum of 3,000 particles in a nanoliter 3 centimeters away. That's my fundamental sensitivity limits. Okay, so you have to design for that. So you design to try to minimize that sensitivity limit. But we also have another one, and usually this one dominates, certainly dominates for in vivo photoacoustic imaging, and that is the tissue background. Namely, I'll have an offset in this signal. I have photoacoustic signal that's happening there. And for photoacoustics, our bad guy, what do you think our bad guy is? Like I said, for typical fluorescence imaging, your autofluorescence, or, labeled fluorescence imaging, autofluorescence. Who's our bad guy here? Blood. Sorry for the acoustic noise there. Blood. Blood's everywhere. Blood's efficient, right? If you pick the wrong wavelength, blood can dominate everything. Okay? And so your specificity is until once you get above a certain concentration of particles, it might be enormous, and you can overcome the blood signal, then you can start to do some counting, which will tell you about the concentration of biomarkers related to the image. Okay? So, to design a proper molecular imaging system in general, and specifically a photoacoustic molecular imaging system, is you must design for both of these limits to try to minimize those. And so one has to do with background suppression, which is a specificity, and the ultimate sensitivity is how much signal I get per particle. Fundamental photoacoustic signal per particle. Okay, so let me give you imaging ideas. And this is a little tumor model again, which we've worked on. And we just to show that we use this little as a demonstration to show the problem. So this is a pause image. So the grayscale background is the ultrasound, and superimposed on top of it is the photoacoustic signal. And in this case, what we've done is we've pre-labeled a bunch of, I think it's just HeLa cells. So it's a very simple model. Pre-labeled a bunch of HeLa cells and then inject them into this tissue. And so we wanted to, because what our goal was, is says, okay, how few cells? You know, because it was part of the grant thing, right? You're writing a grant, you know, we can see one cell was the kind of argument you're trying to go to. And so we start going down. Of course, you see here, we know where the cells are. Do you know where the cells are? Right? It's all over. So the cells are, you know, it's 5,000 cells in a little gel which has been injected all over the place. Right? What's up? Well, that's the problem. That's the specificity problem. Because we just have a signal brightness. And if we try to interpret that, we say, look, we have a tumor, huge tumor right here on the skin surface. Right? Or right here, down here, which is actually a reverberation artifact. All right? But of course, because we kind of made this background so you can think about it, the cells were injected right here in this low area. And so how can you get to them? So those are the target cells. But if I just looked at the image, all right, I'm confounded by these large background signals. And that's the problem with photoacoustics, because you got blood everywhere, and blood can confound things. And so you have to go after that directly. Okay? All right. So again, requirements for molecular imaging, you need both the sensitivity and the specificity. Now I think get a feeling for what I mean by specificity. Okay? Well, to get sensitivity, we do targeting with contrast. We've known that for, you know, over a decade, and people keep working on trying to make more efficient contrast agents. Okay? The second is the specificity. So one is the contrast agents. The other one is trying to do multispectral photo. But just like you do with endogenous stuff, you can try to design systems which have a specific spectral characteristic. And so you can try to do multispectral there to background suppress everybody else, because your spectrum for your agent is unique. Right? Again, with depth, that starts to break down. So for clinical stuff, that's probably not going to be a good way to go. So we have to look at some other background suppression techniques. And I'll talk about them in a minute. Okay? So, to target with contrast agents in combination with some kind of background suppression, whether it's a multispectral or some other method, is required for photoacoustic molecular imaging in vivo because of the blood that's around. So how do we do this? So this is stuff that's been the fun part. We've been working on, and especially the last few years when I ditched my previous job and could spend full time on this. It's been a lot of fun to look at these kinds of agents. We've looked at 3 different approaches for background suppression. One, a pure optical one, which is related to lifetimes. So designing agents which you can have you can exploit coupled systems and look at lifetime measurements to suppress background. Those are not very efficient, so I won't talk about them at all. One which I will talk about is one where the agent efficiency is the same as any other agent, but we can have almost complete background suppression, and I'll show you that. And then I'll end with this agent, which is the one we're pushing now, which can also do almost a perfect background suppression, but increases the inherent transduction efficiency of a singular photoacoustic event by 3 orders of magnitude. Okay? So I say that now just to pique your interest. Okay, so let's go to the first one, which was a system which is a coupled particle system. So these are types of particles which were originally developed for multifunctional imaging. So if you want to do MRI in optical imaging, or MRI in photoacoustic imaging, okay? Or CT in MRI is in the nano world, is a lot of groups have come into designing these multifunctional agents. So one agent we worked with colleagues of ours in Seattle was to design an agent which has a magnetic, so this is a core which is often used for contrast in MRI systems, okay? But is encapsulated in a shell. Originally this was a gold shell, and we're using plasmonic states. We've now totally replaced it just in the last year with a polymer, which is actually an FDA-approved polymer. So this is all composed of FDA-approved materials. These guys know how important that is. You don't know how important it is. That means I can get this in the clinic. Okay? Relatively quickly. All right. The polymer we've picked is one which has a very broad absorption spectrum, so we can work out in this 1053 range, where we have the cheap lasers that are in there. Now, why do we care about this magnetic thing? Why was adding this magnet? So this is a particle that will give us per particle, not per weight concentration of the polymer versus gold or something, but just per particle because it's the same as the gold nanorods. All right, so we can get the same kind of basic photoacoustic signal per particle off of this. But why do we have the magnetic stuff in there? Okay, let's consider this little Gedanken experiment. Let's put in a piece of tissue we have embedded in a set of magnetic nanoparticles. Don't worry about their sitting off a signal or anything now, just so that we have these. And I'll now apply magnetic field to that sample. When I pulse it on, there's a magnetic force to those. Okay, these are superparamagnetic particles. So that you have a force which is proportional to the field strength that you have, or gradient in field strength, and so you can displace those particles. Okay? Now, it's displacing at the micron scale at depths of on the order of a centimeter, but you can displace them. You turn it off, they'll move back. Right? Everybody get that? Moving them. Okay, what if you did the following? What if you were making an image, and simultaneous to making an image, you put on an AC field? Okay? And this field frequency is typically about 30 to 60 hertz that we're using out now. So right at the frame rates of the imaging system that we're using. What's going to happen? Well, if something is moving, like physiologic motion, whatever, which is not synchronous with your reference signal, if I do a lock-in detection or a correlation, think of it as a correlation detection that I'm going to do between these two signals, I get nothing out, right? If, however, it's moving at the same frequency as this, but not in phase with the drive signal, I'll get some small signal out. But it will only get a large signal out when the frequency and the phase of the response, or of the signal that I get out, in our case the photoacoustic image, is synchronous with the magnetic drive. Okay. So we did this in a little setup that was done here just as a tabletop setup, just to show. Here is, this is within a gel, and we just have our control image here, which is a photoacoustic absorber that has no magnetic particles, has no magnetic cores. This has the magnetic cores. We put on the time varying field. We do the tracking, motion tracking of these things. We then do the correlation with the excitation. Notice that in this part of the image, you have this beautiful correlation with the excitation. Over here, you get nothing, right? Because it didn't move synchronously with the field. We can monitor peak displacements as well, but we really make decisions based on that correlation. We can then design masks, and obviously we can eliminate the background. And this I've just shown as a mask. You can do this as a linear system too, in case there's some superposition of both tagged and untagged labels. So it's a way to separate. So what does it do? How can it work? How can it provide this higher specificity in a photoacoustic molecular image? So here's what we've done. We have our little mouse model. Oh, by the way, I should have shown this further. Almost all of the photoacoustic systems in those big spherical systems, and when you're doing small animal imaging, you put the animal in a water tank. Okay?
Is the Ithera system?
Yeah, but no, this one's us. This is us. But it's the same type of thing. Why are they in a water tank? Preparing for the Olympics?
better coupling with.
Yeah, the coupling. It's the ultrasonic coupling. Right. So you have to have the coupling. So that's why we do this. It makes the coupling easy, but obviously you got to make sure that the mouse breathes. Okay. And we're going to just have a system. So in addition to a standard photoacoustic system, we brought in this electromagnet. It's a very cheap system. So this is not an MRI gradient coil or anything. This is a very, very cheap magnetic system, home built in the lab. And you drive it, but now you have these three things. You have the light coming in, the ultrasound transducer, and this magnetic source. And we just translate, because we're doing 2D imaging, so we're doing cross-sectional imaging, then we translate the mouse to get 3D. So this is what we have, and this is a paper came out about a year ago, is that we have, again, this mouse model for a tumor. We are able to target the specific cell line here. It's these magnetic particles. We make the ultrasound image. You can hardly see. The photoacoustic image is this huge blob of stuff because of not a lot of near-field reverberation. This is something Martin Friends has talked a lot about, which is real when you try to do clinical stuff, this near-field cloud that you have with photoacoustics. Then we do the correlation mapping. So what you have here is the field. So there's the magnetization in the field. There's the correlation map. And then you can do one of these linear masking operations, and there it is. And when taken out and histology is done, that's precisely where the tumor is. Yeah.
So these are spions, actually? These particles are spion?
The inside, the core is.
Right.
The core is.
Okay.
And so the core is about 25 nanometers, and the total particle diameter is about 50. And so you get images like this. So here's your ultrasound picture. That's just an artifact of our translation system on top. Here's your photoacoustic picture, which has junk all over the place. This is then your maps that you get from the magnetics and the magnetomotive correlation functions, and then you can carve out the tumor precisely from that. That's specificity. Okay? So you have a direct one-to-one correlation between the biomarker that you're labeling and the image brightness. Okay. That's cool. But now I want you to forget it. Because it's just a cool way of showing how you can do some tricks to get rid of the background. But you really have to get rid of the background. But the major problem for photoacoustics is sensitivity. Okay? And sensitivity has to do with the contrast agents we're currently using, which are linear contrast agents. Because it's pure optical absorption is what we're doing. So all the agents I just showed you, and all the agents over the last 15 years developed, are using linear, or what I would call linear contrast agents, meaning that you try to increase the optical absorption in the area, but the sound is produced by the water around the particles, because it's the heat transfer. So it's absorbing the heat transfer over these time scales into the waters, the thermal expansion coefficients of the water, which determines in the transduction. Remember, it had that beta over Cp? So it's fundamentally water, and that's what limits it. So you say, oh, I make the optical absorption higher and higher and higher. What's to happen? It just puts heat. And you only can put so much heat, right, in there before you do damage. So a linear contrast agent is fundamentally limited, all right? And you can change temperatures, you can do some manipulations, but factors 2, 3 is about all you can do in the world when you're working in this linear world. Okay? That's that part. So when you go through the calculations of going into a couple centimeters of depth, knowing that you have these characteristics with the constants of water, what you find is you're going to be restricted to the nanomolar range of agents. All right? Now remember, when I was introducing the molecular imaging, I was contrasting PET and MRI. MRI is micromolar to hundreds of nanomolar. So we look good there. Remember what I said about PET? PET is picomolar. Right? So picomolar concentrations, no way. I was really going to compete. And that's a fundamental limit. So I mean, all you can do is go backwards from there. Right, so is there a way around it? Yes. So looking for nonlinear contrast agents. Let me show you what I mean. Okay. Now this is leveraging work by one of our colleagues in Seattle who was just looking at ways to make what are called Pickering emulsions, but to integrate in, at the time, what he was interested in is trying to create plasmonic structures in this way, where it's done through emulsification with an oil to produce a structure like this. So again, it's a core shell kind of structure, but the inner material is an oil, in this case, a perfluorocarbon oil, and the outer layer in his original, her original designs were to try to make plasmonic states. So to try to get these small nanoparticles close enough together to which you can have coupling between them and you can have enhanced optical absorption at longer wavelengths. So we saw this stuff and started talking with the group, and what we got excited by is the possibility with this kind of construct of doing the following. And that is to take this kind of system, okay, and these are typically around 100 to 200, so we're still in the size range. The ones I will show you are 135 nanometers, the results on. We're still trying to get these sub-100 nanometers, because again, we want to be in this 50 to 100 range for optimum clinical applications. But when they put in a pulsed light source, which now would create this local absorption into the plasmonic states here, can create heating, can cause a phase transition in the center material. So it'll go from a liquid to a gas. With an expansion, orders of magnitude in terms of volume higher, which in fact will create pressures which are orders of magnitude higher for that event. So if you do this as a time-modulated light to be absorbed in here, instead of the thermal expansion of water determining the signal, it will be the expansion of this agent, which determines the signal. And as we've worked on the last couple of years, we can tune this system so that it's perfectly reversible. So there's an expansion, and then there's a recondensation into the liquid, and there can be some loss, but very, very little in this, and so you can actually continuously image that expansion, that nonlinear expansion. And then here's the last trick, which really made this thing practical. All right, so I'll just stand over here. You guys get my acoustic radiation. So you're in the near field. Okay. So it's going to take me a minute to explain this, but it's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool. Okay, so here's the little experiment we did with these agents. Okay, so we just have a cuvette with the agents in it, that's fine. We have three things we're doing. One is we have a low-frequency ultrasound transducer, which is just insonifying this area. And that's this waveform you see here. Okay? This waveform you see here is just recorded by a second transducer over here, which is very, very broadband, because it just wants to see whatever's out there, whatever sound's out there. So we're insonifying with this. We then now pulse a laser, so we're doing this at very low frequencies, 1.2 megapascal ultrasonically, at low pressures. Okay? These are diagnostic, actually even lower than diagnostics, a mechanical index well less than 1, for those who are ultrasound folks out there. And we're doing this at about half the limits for half the limit of laser exposure. Okay? So in other words, we're well within the diagnostic range of both the light and the sound. And what you're seeing over here is recording of the sound signal. And watch what happens when we just change the point in which the laser is delivered to the system. We deliver the laser to the peak of this system, which in the way this is set up, peak corresponds to maximum compression. So you're compressing the agent. You'll see that when we move from maximum compression to maximum rarefaction, we totally change that signal. What is that signal? That's that bubble. That's the phase transition. Okay, so it's going through this phase transition. Why is it only happening at one phase of this ultrasound signal? You know, you're thermodynamics. So it's in one case, you're going along a phase diagram, right? So you're going along a temperature pressure phase diagram. In one case, you're condensing, right? compressing the material. You put a little bit of heat, not enough to change state, so you get nothing out of there. When you're in the negative cycle, which is rarefaction, you're trying to pull the thing apart. Right? So a little trigger from the light pulse, it can do this. I'll do that again, right? So when it's being compressed, you're just going along a phase diagram of pressure and temperature. When you are in the positive phase, it's compressing, so it's pushing in. And so when you heat a little bit, you don't have sufficient energy to cause the phase transition in that, so that it will rapidly expand and create the acoustic signal. On the other phase, exact opposite. You're trying to pull the thing apart because it's a negative pressure, and the little light pulse is just enough to take it into that phase transition in the oscillating state. And that's why you see the wiggles going over there. And this is the other point, is why it goes back and forth. It's totally reproducible. Okay? So, I can tell everybody's running out of steam, so I'll try to go through this quickly. Yeah?
I'm just wondering about the photostability, like how much you can expose those oil emissions for it to compress and expand. Like, is there a specific number of times that process can happen?
Yeah, well, the ones we've done it for hours, where we're doing it
Highly
rapidly.
photostable.
Yeah, yeah. It's stable. I'm going to say photostable. It's stable. Because the events that we get is more when there's two states, and that's at the very end, I'll show you that when we go into the second stage. There's two states, so it's a cavitation type event. The first part is a stable cavitation, meaning that it's reversible. The other one, when we get a little bit higher intensities, we can go to an inertial cavitation state where there's a catastrophic collapse and it explodes. Okay? Every once in a while you get that. Yeah.
So, but this phase transition is not isentropic, which basically says that the phase transition itself is using part of the heat
Yes.
to reproduce itself and then
Right.
to materialize itself. So that's part of your background in some ways.
Yeah, but you can suppress, well, you'll see here, we can suppress all that because it's only that which is related to the difference between positive and negative phases of pressure. Is what we're going to image.
That's why you can do that.
Yes. But yeah, every once in a while we get into the second phase where we can blow it up. All right? But we can use that to our advantage later. Okay. All right. Now you're not ultrasound people, so I'm sorry, I made this graph like what ultrasound people do. But there is a standard imaging technique in ultrasound called pulse inversion, or nonlinear imaging. And the idea there is you take advantage of the second order nonlinearity you have for acoustic propagation in the body. And the way you make an image is you do two pulses. You do a pulse with a positive pressure as the first lobe, and then you repeat it with a negative pressure as the second lobe. And then you add the two pulses together. If it was perfectly linear, you get 0, right? You got 1 and -1. If you have a nonlinearity, there'll be a residual, and then you image that residual. So that's called pulse inversion, and all ultrasound systems now have this capability of doing that. It's called harmonic imaging, or pulse inversion imaging, or tissue harmonic imaging, is all done. Okay, we've leveraged off that to make photoacoustic pulse inversion imaging. And so what we're doing, let me just focus on this part. There's other stuff in there which has to do with getting rid of artifacts. But the primary things we're going to do is we're going to make an image where the photoacoustics is, the light is delivered in a region precisely at the time of peak positive pressure. Okay? Put the light on at peak positive pressure. The second pulse you put on is precisely at peak negative pressure. Okay? Now subtract them. Now, the ultrasound part, that's why you have these extra things. The ultrasound parts don't cancel right, but you can make that little correction over here. What happens to the photoacoustic parts? If something's perfectly linear, and I go one laser pulse, second laser pulse, and I subtract them, what do I get?
0.
0. Okay? But if I have one laser pulse and it's in this positive phase, I get nothing, or close to 0 from our particles. You might get background signals, right? But this guy, when you go here, I get a huge signal from our particles, but the same background signals as the first pulse. So when I subtract them, the only thing I see is the particles. Okay? So I have a system which has the potential to increase the sensitivity by about 3 orders of magnitude, and the specificity has a background subtraction native to it. Let's go to that. Let's go to this. Okay, so this is just showing, this is phantom. This is just phantom. It's not even in tissue, in animal models yet. So this is just going to benchtop. But it's just showing the demonstration. So this is a little phantom we made, and in it we have ultrasound picture, and within the chamber is where we have a very low concentration of nanoparticle. In fact, it's picomolar concentration of that nanoemulsion. If we just make a conventional photoacoustic picture, we put, someone was asking me about, I think the lady was asking me about, can you see the coffee? And I said, we use little black magic markers sometimes to get fiducial mark. That's what we have right down here. So just put a little black magic marker in the bottom of your phantom, and you can get a nice little photoacoustic signal off it. Okay, so we have that. So we see our linear photoacoustic signal here. I see nothing in here. Okay? Why do I see nothing in here? I'm at picomolar concentrations, and if it's just linear photoacoustics, I told you I have to get up at nanomolar before I can see anything. Right? By just using the thermal expansion of water. Okay. If I use that trick of this plus-minus phase, is I can make an image where now that image only shows the region which is the residual, which is exactly where the contrast agent is. And here's doing it in real time. And so this is integrated over a few frames. In real time, you see there's some imperfections. Our background subtraction is not ideal, but we are in real time with a signal-to-noise ratio of around 30 dB or so, seeing picomolar concentrations of this agent for suppression.
The question is, people have been using bubble cavitation to enhance for acoustic signals and so on. So how does that stand compared to what are called conventional collapsing bubbles and generating for acoustic signals? In thermoacoustic signals, actually, most of them have been, because the bubble...
yeah, but usually the bubble... So where's the bubble come from? So if the bubble comes from an ablation or something like that?
That's right.
Right, so it's destructive. I mean, this is from an agent. That's primarily the difference.
That's a difference.
Okay, so real-time imaging. So, last thing, then we'll go eat. So your question about stability. Okay? Let's come back. I already did that one. So if I take this guy, I told you, put in the light, the sound, but I can make it blow up too. Okay, so here's just an example of that. Okay, again, this is just tabletop, so it's still early. But what we have here is just a fibrin plot. Okay? And up here is the nanoemulsion. And I'll start it in just a second, but what you'll see is we're doing exactly that experiment I was doing before. We're bringing in light here, and we have sound, and you're just recording the sound. But you're synchronizing the light delivery that you'll be in the negative phase when you're in the center of that clock. Okay? So when that light is delivered, whoops, sorry. Didn't play automatically. Okay? You can see here, so there's the ultrasound signal that's from before, because it's before the light got there. So that doesn't change at all. When the light's delivered to the central region in the clock, you can do it and you can bust the clock very, very efficiently and effectively. Now, we would never do the procedure like this because you would have huge fragments going down here. It would clog off, it would obstruct somewhere south of this clock. But this is just a quick demonstration to show in a very fast period you can get this, because these nanosystems are diffusing very, very quickly through the clock, because they're comparable to pore sizes in the clocks. And so they can diffuse very quickly. And so just by changing, in this case, we've changed the acoustic intensity by that factor of 3 over what I showed before, is that we can use this inertial phase or the destructive phase to do meaningful work. All right? So again, these same particles which you can tag, you can image, you can know what they are, you can also ablate, and selectively ablate, just by changing the acoustic parameters. Okay, enough. I'm saturated, I can tell. Do you know what the MeGo index is? You know what the MeGo index is? Nobody knows what the MeGo. My eyes glaze over. Okay? And it ranges from 1 to 10. You guys are about a 7 to 8, which means you need food. So let me just summarize this last piece we had. There's really a rich set of molecular agents. This has been it's kind of a cottage industry over about the last decade. But I think we're actually moving to agents which are practical agents with materials which can follow along an FDA approval pathway very easily. Oh, I'm sorry, forgot to say that. What you saw with those agents, these last agents with nanoemulsions, those original ones which had gold on the outside, those will never be approved. They've replaced those with the same polychlorol polymer now. Okay? So there's this rich set of agents now which can get you the kinds of sensitivity and specificity which is needed for practical molecular imaging in the body. Still a ways to go, but I think we're on the right path because the kinds of materials we're using are compatible with clinical systems. I think you've seen that we can produce systems that can make reasonable images, not optimal images, but reasonable images at depth for doing real-time procedures. And counters can be used to both drug and biologic delivery and ablative therapy. So like I said before, with the drugs to go in there, here's another one which we've talked to people about but not done, which is in the agents themselves, is we can load up with some drugs. So they can be taken in, we can monitor them just like you're doing, and then we go into a mild ablative mode and deliver the drug whenever you want. So have an image-guided, not only drug delivery in terms of macroscopically siting it in the same place, but also actually activating the agent effectively in the region. Okay, so I'll end with thanking, but these are the last couple of years. Friends, red is faculty colleagues, blue are postdocs who have worked in the group, and people who have given us money. So thanks a lot, and let's eat.
Thank you, Matt, for that wonderful tour through acoustics and into photoacoustics. Are there any pressing questions?
No, I can tell. The MeGo index is up around 7, 8, so it's time to eat.
Matt will be around.